Okay, wunderbar. Dann legen wir los. Schön, dass ihr alle da seid. Schön, dass alle online dabei sind. In den vergangenen Semestern haben wir viele verschiedene Aspekte der Klimakrise angesprochen. Und wir haben auch sehr viel über Lebensmittelversorgung, Versorgungsketten gesprochen. Wir haben über Wasserzugang gesprochen. Heute haben wir einen neuen, aber ebenso wichtigen Aspekt, ähm, nämlich unseren Umgang mit Scheiße. Ich bin sehr aufgeregt, dass wir heute dieses Thema dran haben wollen, denn genau wie die Klimakrise ist es ein Thema, mit dem wir uns erst beschäftigen möchten, eigentlich, wenn wir damit konfrontiert sind. Und meistens ist es zu spät, wenn wir damit konfrontiert sind. Und in den meisten Fällen ist es auch scheiße, wenn wir damit konfrontiert sind. Von daher haben wir heute die wunderbare Dr. Sarah Nahar und nun wechsle ich auch ins Englische. Today we have Sarah Nahar. She's a nonviolent action trainer, an interspiritual theologian, and a scholar with focus on environmental studies and religion. Her doctoral work centers on ecological regeneration, community cultivation, and discard studies. She's been a Rotary Peace Fellow at the Martin Luther King Jr. Center in Atlanta and the executive director of Community Peacemaker Teams, an organization committed to building partnerships to transform violence and oppression worldwide. Today, we are honored to have the opportunity to hear her lecture on dealing with our shit, literally and metaphorically. Climate justice through the lens of the discard. Thank you and welcome, Dr. Sarah Nahar.
Thank you, Danny. Vielen Dank. Okay. It is so good to be with you all. And as we are connecting virtually across space and time, I will just rely on you to let me know if there's anything that is funny with the tech. But it's so good to be with you all. And as we're at this time when the light gradually lessens and the hours of the day abruptly change, we are reminded that change often happens in steady waves in this larger web of life that we're a part of. And change in our social spheres is also happening at every level. Yes, the big demonstrations, but also through daily acts of care, through communities choosing to hold each other, and through people like you who are supporting the ecosystem, even when our future feels uncertain. So I hope that what I can share today can strengthen you for the journey ahead. And I see the messages coming in the chat, but just a heads up that I won't be able to read those and that the moderators will support everyone putting their Q&A into the chat, or if you're in the space at the end of this presentation, there will be ample time to discuss. We'll also do some interactive pieces throughout with yourself in a journal, things of that nature, just like really taking in what is ours to do and be right now in this wild world. So by showing up here today, we are feeding the soil, fortifying the network, tending to the roots of our movements. And I spend a lot of time in social and ecological justice movements, yet my favorite movement to tend to, as you might guess from the title, is the bowel movement. This is the movement in our bodies of digesting the world, metabolizing its energetic forces, and then releasing what we cannot use. How we feel about our shit, literally and metaphorically, can tell us a lot about how we feel about the icky, sticky, smelly, messy things of this world. And studying poop can offer insight into what peoples and lands and waters and ideas are also discarded, ignored, denied, or overall just flushed and forgotten. I'll get more into that later, but the thesis of my wandering lecture today is this: we won't stop treating people and the planet like shit until we stop treating shit like shit. A little on my positionality. I have a broad family now, but this is my family of origin. I'm from the so-called Midwest. It's because the United States is a settler colonial nation, and I'm in the Great Lakes watershed, and it's traditional Potawatomi land here. And so, as a person of African descent as well as European descent, I come from both willing settlers from that Alsace-Lorraine region, as well as unwilling settlers from West Africa, both about 7 generations ago. I find myself on this land, and the unwilling settlers, of course, were forced to come in the transatlantic trade in the African peoples. And the folks that came from Europe were Mennonites who were escaping religious persecution, but yet were able to gain power right away when they arrived in the United States, unlike the unwilling settlers on my other side. And my family is interracial. We adopted my brother, and also we've experienced in different moments incarceration. And when there's incarceration, it's not just the person that's incarcerated. You may know that the U.S. incarcerates more people than almost anywhere else, but the whole family in many ways is pulled into the carceral system. So those are some things that inform who I am and where I'm coming from. So a lot of Mennonite and Black feminist influences. And today, just picking up the phone and seeing the news of the Immigration and Customs Enforcement raids ongoing in Chicago, and recognizing that what's happening in the United States right now inside the US is something that has been going on since 1492, and also something that the United States has done a lot of places around the world and trained on Black and Brown and Palestinian and other peoples around the world that is now coming home to the US in a certain way. And so part of my work also is challenging Christian nationalism and its foreign policy of Christian Zionism, to be able to say that, like, how religions have been used is not really the depth of what they're intended for. And we'll touch more on religion as we keep going, but that's like a lot of our work together as my family, to just like witness to another way of being and another way that religions can work for peace. Yeah, I spent most of this morning in the US trying to get healthcare, which is very expensive and a whole shit show, so to speak, within the context of the US. But we are working on developing mutual aid networks, and we're especially doing that by learning from the most marginalized communities how they have survived under really authoritarian regimes. Again, not new in the US, but birthed out of the genocide and ecocide and enslavement that founds this place. So my work in nonviolence and decolonization is the basis for the work of racial justice that I do. And it has to do, again, like, I know that the US is not the center of the world at all. And yet what we do here often has these broad impacts. So I want to talk from my place with a lot of humility. But I got really connected with environmental politics from learning from Indigenous folks, as you see one of my homies on the right here out in Pine Ridge, one of the autonomous regions of South Dakota, and in our anti-war work that happens because the work in nonviolence is not simply just to say no to violence, but to work in ways that are prefigurative, that model the way we want to be in the world. So how can we build community? How can we share power? How can we work together across lines of difference? All of that is super important and is required when doing strategic, disciplined, nonviolent struggle that allows us to outsmart the opposition by like being our whole and full selves. So that is a lot of what formed what I'm trying to say. And one thing that I learned a lot within the context of nonviolent social justice work is that we need to pay attention to those who are most impacted by any of the policies or any of the violence that is happening, because it's from their perspective, those who are often discarded, targeted for elimination, and who are underserved, that are thinking creatively about alternatives because the system as it is doesn't work for them, right? And so those are people who are treated like shit. And so what can we learn from them and how can we be? So in whatever struggle you're working on, go learn from the people who are most impacted by it. They don't necessarily have all the answers or know everything. I'm just saying, when you put yourself in proximity to those who are most impacted, the world looks different and possibilities open up that you hadn't thought about, and ways of being that are different than business as usual and dominant culture also become possible. This is really important to me because our activist movement sometimes can start to be focused on only the tactics and the strategies that we think work. And I think about our movements now as like an ecosystem, and a healthy ecosystem is biodiverse. It has many ways of being. There are plants and animals that stick in one location. There are pollinators that go between. There are mycorrhizal fungi, mycelial connections underground that will never be seen. There's just like a whole ecosystem when it comes to the importance of climate justice and actually like being able to help make a just transition. So it's really important to me that we work together among ourselves to not marginalize each other, to learn from impacted communities. And there's not just one, but a lot of different impacted communities to come together. And this I like to remember through 3 words. In English, they all start with a B. One is blocking harm. The other is building alternatives. And the third is being in values alignment. So I want to talk about each of these aspects of a movement ecosystem so that you can know and feel that you are part of making a difference, even if you're not necessarily on a particular type of front line. So the first one, for example, blocking harm. This is the aspect of work in climate justice that has to do with slowing damage to the earth and its beings. It is often what people think about when they hear the word activism. It is the work that is boldly out front saying no and saying this has to stop, right? Whatever it is, but it's trying to like create space for something else to emerge by pushing back at the intensity and onslaught of like neoliberal global racial capitalism, right? Or any industrial growth society, communism, whatever it is, right? Like these big systems that don't see people and ecosystems as tender, gentle, unique, and networked within watersheds, right? So blocking harm relates to helping to figure out how to keep people and their ecosystems alive and well. But after harm, like enduring while harm is blocked, blocking harm and saying no is not enough. The saying yes and actually doing the work of building alternatives is really key. So if you're someone who knows you're going to be out there on the front lines, we love you and that is awesome. You may also be someone that is into like might never find yourself on the front lines, but will always be the person who is there each and every Wednesday weeding the community garden far after people have really forgotten that the garden was an important thing to participate in, right? That might be you, the person who is just always willing to do the minutes of like take the notes in the meeting and like follow up well. It's sometimes behind the scenes work. It's sometimes creating new systems. Like if we don't like how this system works, what's the alternative? Maybe you're the person that helps to create those and helps to reconcile and connect people who've had conflict to each other, right? To build an alternative system. Maybe that's you. There's still like yet another one, which is those of you who might be like, I'm a musician and an artist. I help people shift their consciousness so that we can actually live in different ways. These are also folks who do like spiritual activism and connect us to what is deepest in ourselves in order to have some personal transformation so that we can participate more powerfully when we go towards building alternatives and blocking harm. You can kind of see it like this. Like blocking harm and building alternatives might be like two sides of the same coin. But the side of the coin itself would be being in alignment. Or you can see these as three spheres in Venn diagrams. But the most powerful actions in climate justice and in any movement have elements of blocking harm, elements of the lived alternative that is being built, and an element of a shifted consciousness that understands that we're not just all these individuals bumping up against each other, but yet we're actually an organism of together and part of the body of the earth itself expressing itself. And that shifted consciousness allows us to reduce our ego and to, most importantly for this talk, deal with our shit. This is the internal stuff that we have to deal with. So block, build, be for short. And Buddhist Peace Fellowship is one of the orgs that's helping people in the US and around the world think about their movement ecosystems. So how did I get into this? So bit of a fuzzy picture here, but it is a picture of a festival. I really enjoy being in Collapskamp, where I met Danny and others. It was a type of festival, but we're also looking at like conscious collapse. And what does it mean when our societies are collapsing, as well as our movement tactics are also collapsing, and the earth is collapsing under the weight of everything that's going on in business as usual? Like, how do we handle that collapse at 426 parts per million? What can we do? What should we be ready for? Right. And so this Carnival de Resistance was a 7-year festival in which we experimented in living a fossil fuel free life in the middle of the city. We rode bicycles, we slept in tents, and we participated together with others in dramatizing eco-theological themes. And we also had composting toilets. Now, this is me participating in the carnival during the water show. And I was like, I'm rad. I can stay in a tent. I can cook my food fossil fuel free. But composting toilet, that's where I draw the line, right? So at first, my interaction with them, I was like, I'm kind of disgusted. But look, what happens is when you got to go, you got to go. So eventually I did go and I didn't die. So that was awesome. And over the course of a month, I got used to using composting toilet, which basically you excrete and then you cover your excreta with a scoop of like sawdust or wood chips. And in this case, we were using the bucket system, and then we sealed them all. And at the end of the carnival, I actually got to see how at a local farm, how our excreta was being reintegrated in orchards and used for biochar and in flower beds. And I was like, wait, this is amazing. This shit that I have is actually a gift to the earth. I thought it was just this gross, flush and forget, don't pay attention to it kind of thing. But no. So then I was like, okay, I have a new life goal. I have all this background in anti-imperialist work and unarmed civilian accompaniment, but I don't want to shit in fresh water ever again. How do I do that? Right. And as soon as I had that goal, I started to bump up with the reality that the freshwater flush toilet is part and parcel of the way that business as usual in dominant culture, European American systems, it's right in there. And in the US, in most municipalities, it's illegal to innovate and to have closed loop sanitation. And so even if people want to like install a composting toilet, they're not necessarily allowed. There's some various reasons for this, but I then started to think about, hey, this is not just an individual issue. This is an organizing conundrum. And not only is it a matter of infrastructure, but just like myself, who was initially disgusted, and really didn't have anyone to talk to about it because the subject is taboo and not really spoken about. Right? Euphemized. I have to go to the bathroom, the washroom, like without saying I have to go poop or pee or menstruate or whatever else, right? So I said, okay, this is about to be revolution from the bottom up. Let's figure this out. So this is the part of the struggle that I'm dedicating myself to. It has a lot to do with being in values alignment, but I also work on the building of alternatives to the freshwater flush domination system and letting people know about the harm actually that's happening. At least in the US, we have major issues in which our rivers and waterways are polluted because there's way too much urine in them. And we're spending so much money in each city and countryside to try to contain our poop, where actually the urine has nitrogen, potassium, phosphorus, the mineral load, and that can be super supportive as fertilizer, and it's pretty much sterile. It can go through one pasteurization process and be available. And on the other hand, poop, which has a pathogenic load potentially, can be used for sequestering carbon. And even if it's not used agriculturally, it's really useful for soil, stopping erosion, etc. Right? So I started to find out all this stuff, and the way I found it out was like I went to school. I studied on the land of the Onondaga Nation, who are the firekeepers of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and are the people who tried to teach the early settler colonial U.S. about what it means to be democratic. And so they influenced in the U.S. the state and federal system, but the Haudenosaunee have a particular rule that says if the male chiefs do not behave, the females clan mothers are allowed to remove them. Well, the U.S. took a lot of advice from the Haudenosaunee, but they did not implement the rule that if a male leader was misbehaving, that the clan mothers could get together and take him out of power, which is too bad. Not only for what we're dealing with now, but for a very, very long time. So in this place where Haudenosaunee life and well-being is strong is where I studied at Syracuse University in religion, and right next door at the State University of New York College of Environmental Science and Forestry. And I studied there in environmental studies. For me, it was important, given the impact of the doctrine of discovery and domination and these kind of rules that allowed for enslavement, settler colonization, and environmental degradation. It was important for me to bring back together spirituality within the context of environmental studies work and to bring environmental studies rigor to the study of what different religious communities are doing. So that's why I decided to do a PhD in this work. So going deeper into what is religion and this the value questions that is important to bring that environmental rigor to. It's really important that as environmentalists must learn to speak the language of values if we hope to reach more people and help them fall in love with life on Earth, right? We got some uber wealthy folks who want to leave Earth behind and go to other places, such as Mars or the moon. And, you wonder sometimes if people love living on Earth or not. I'm wearing the sweatshirt of Soul Fire Farm right now, which is a group of people in the Haudenosaunee Confederacy in upstate New York who are working on removing racism from the food system and looking at injustice in it and falling in love with Earth and relearning how to plant and connect with the land and just be able to say okay, yeah, even if we're struggling with a lot on Earth in terms of social inequity and changing climate and heartbreak, well, at least there's oxygen here and we can keep working on it together. Like on Mars and the moon, I mean, no shade to them, but there's not oxygen. And so those who are talking about going there are unapologetically calling it space colonization. You can see the trajectory. And what would it mean to help people decide to be here now? They're doing surveys across a few universities asking folks, young people if you could either go into a space pod near the moon or one on Mars and have your gadgets and devices and everything like that, or you stay on Earth, but you don't have some of the trappings of this life right now, which would you choose? And even though sometimes some of the young people are relatively regretful about it, they do say, I guess I would go where I can keep my phone. Some people are triumphant about trying to leave. Others just say, like, that's, I guess, what I would need to do, right, in order to keep this particular way of life. And that does break my heart because this planet is so amazing and we can find ways to deeply connect and get through the blocks and gaps that our phones are helping us like skip over by doing by being together. But like by being together, we have to like deal with our shit, that messy, icky, sticky, weird parts of life that gives us lots of information, but to be with it, then I think people will fall in love. But when you're talking with folks, of course, it's not just facts and figures about the intensity of the collapse that we're facing collectively and have been facing for a long time in many parts of the world. It's connecting with what I might call a religion or spirituality, or the religious or spiritual part of them, which has to do with like how they make meaning of what is going on. So really getting curious, really always approaching with curiosity. What's it like for you to live in a world that doesn't seem to be coherent? Right? How do you think it got that way? How are you feeling now? And hearing how people are making meaning can be a really significant way that we can connect with more folks. And also recognizing that it's our orienting stories that are often driving various behaviors. So in terms of like, it matters whether or not Earth in your idea is just a supply house that you can get stuff from and a sewer that you dump stuff in, if that's how Earth is seen, or if Earth is a living, breathing body, and we as humans are Earth's consciousness reflecting on itself. And that Earth is kind of the place, not kind of, that like, that it's enough, right? And that limits are not only barriers, but invitations to creativity, right? So figuring out what people's orienting stories are will be really helpful. And if you know additional things about particular religions such as Hinduism, Judaism, Islam, Buddhism, Christianity, Zoroastrianism, pagan and reclaiming traditions, if you know some specifics and you know that that person practices there, lean in to respecting and learning and asking them. If you don't know, you can just ask, how does your faith or spiritual practice relate to how you show up each day? Just getting curious about that. And religion also is not, again, not just beliefs, but it's like the rituals that people do, the practices they do, the worldview they have, and how they relate to all other beings. Like if the rest of the larger web of life is just seen as material that doesn't have its own process or like beingness, versus other different worldviews that have a sense of companionship with, as humans, together with all other beings, right? So those are some concepts that we learn about within the context of religion to expand it from being just narrow, dogmatic, doctrinal things towards language of values. And in Germany, having had a state church, right, there's like this articulated connection, supposedly, with some aspects of Christianity. And so there's a lot of ways in which, even if you're allergic to religion, if someone's trying to convince you of something like Christian nationalism or Christian Zionism, you can push back on the basis of Christianity itself, talking about care for the widow, the orphan, the migrant, right? Those are all also aspects of that tradition. And you can talk about forgiveness, nonviolence, love, all of those things. And when you are connecting with somebody religious and trying to assist them in participating in the environmental movement, you can speak on in that register. Yeah, rather than just say, oh, your faith is not important. That doesn't draw people in. Help them make the bridge. So, in part of the work that I was doing around making some of these bridges, I thought a lot about the word waste in English, which is now a noun. It used to be only a verb. So you can waste something. So here's a phrase in English. Waste isn't a waste until you waste it. Like in nature, there is no waste. But all beings discard, so we can embrace our discarded resources. So literally and metaphorically, our energy can transform if we're smart. And I want to shout out Max Libor-Aron from Discard Studies and the work that they have done on the connections between pollution and colonialism and thinking about our movement ecosystem. The work that other people are doing in other arenas, even if it's not together with what your group is doing, it doesn't need to be seen as a waste or a waste of time or a distraction. Rather, the fact that we are all feeding and discarding, and we can resource each other in really creative ways. But we need to be smart about it. So let's chat about some of those things. So with poop specifically, right? Okay, yeah, probably some of what's going through some of your heads is yeah, but poop is smelly. People don't want to be around it. It's gross or icky. It spreads disease. It's got to be treated to be safe. There's a lot of it, and there's more being produced all the time, which is why if we don't deal with the shit now, woo, 8 billion people, there's going to be more and more of it. And it definitely is piling up and can create disease and spread if we don't deal with it. Same with our history, right? Our history is challenging. It's not all great. Most of it is not great. If you just kind of try to push it back and say, we're moving forward, that was that generation, this is now, without looking at the ways in which these waves of influences have continued, then it piles up and it's a problem. But there are some benefits, specifically to poop, right? It's got lots of nutrients for plants. There's energy stored in it. It keeps us healthy to regularly excrete. So this is not about feeling bad that we shit. It's about what can we do instead of putting shit in fresh water? Yeah. Anyway, we can get lots of information about our health. It can be a resource and an employment opportunity. What I mean by that is that there's always labor that goes into the collection, transporting, processing, and reintegration or disposal of excreta. And even if you can't see it, there's labor going in. But there are many ways in which a bunch of different jobs could be created instead of the certain type of mechanization that we have and the use of the natural world's abilities. We're over reliant on that, whereas we should be dealing with our shit and not just say, oh, the soils in the river will deal with it. No, they need to receive it in a processed way, and it never actually ever needs to go in the river. So how are some people doing this? Definitely want to give a shout out to Haiti, where they're really working in some amazing ways at closing the poop loop, because right now it's open, right? In the sense that we eat from a watershed, and then we excrete and it goes into another one. The nutrients don't cycle. But the slide may be a little difficult to see, so I'll just go around it here. At the top, there are toilets that provide people with access to safe, dignified sanitation. And this is important, y'all, because 3.5 million, no, billion. Oh my God. Yeah. 3.5 billion people don't have access to safely managed sanitation. It's a major crisis, but it's underreported. No porta potty, no box, no easeful way to just release in peace. You might think back to when you pooped already today, or If you're gonna yet poop today, good luck. You got this. You assume you can get to a washroom to do that, yeah. But for many people, trying to excrete safely really like challenges their whole day. Like they have to like really um, plan and stay safe around the public toilets and different things like that. Or in the US, for example, if you're homeless, there's a lot of lack of public restrooms. So there's some open defecation issues here in the US and in numerous other countries. So for like having a composting toilet that meets all the UN standards for human rights, it's accessible, affordable, dignified, private, safe, and quality. That's key. And then the excreta is collected there in the barrel image, and it's transported to one of the waste processing treatment sites. This slide does say waste. Okay. And then after like testing and processing, like thorough lab testing of like the poop and bagasse they use in Haiti, they use the sugarcane like discard that comes when after you mill sugarcane. It's called bagasse, and it's a really great material that can help break down the shit and help it really become soil. And that finished compost, the leaf at the bottom there, is a valuable resource that nourishes the soil. They always test for E. coli and anything else, C. diffida, anything that's, and the poop as well as other compost, like need in order to break down into soil needs to be at about 150 degrees Celsius. Oh, no, Fahrenheit. Sorry, I should have done that conversion to Celsius. Oh, so US centric of me. But 140 to 150 degrees Fahrenheit for at least a week, ideally longer. In soil Haiti's process, they do it for almost 6 months. Then that finished compost goes and helps like reforest, stabilize the environment, and it works for agriculture as well. And that makes some nutritious organic food. So that's one way that people are closing the poop loop. And I just wanted to show you some other examples. Up here is a rural home system that people are doing outside of municipalities in the US. People can do this. And this is actually a picture of Joe Jenkins, who wrote the Humanure Handbook, right? So manure in English is what non-human animals create. So humans create humanure. So that's one way to call our offerings. But not only that, also in downtown Portland, they're starting to try to create whole systems where they got a zoning variance to try, where everything that is discarded in the building gets reworked and broken down into composted and is available then to recycle in various ways. And Sanitation in Kenya, here's an example of them making briquettes, and that's important because that's a major fuel source. And Sanitation they employ people to collect urine and feces, and the feces are consumed by Ermetia illucens, which are called black soldier flies. And then whatever the black soldier flies, the larva can't eat, goes into a thermophilic compost, and whatever after that becomes a briquette that like actually burns longer and steadier than a charcoal briquette. And that's important because a lot of trees are cut down for charcoal. And so your poop, together with like wood sawdust and stuff, can like stop deforestation. How awesome is that? And then for the larva, like the larvae are amazing, right? Because like dung beetles, there's like a whole bunch of folks, insect beings that know how to handle shit, that transform it. Like the scarab is famous for this in Egypt, right? Just to be able to move death and decay into something that becomes life again. So black soldier flies are a part of this, and the larvae poop out an awesome frass. But before they turn into flies, they are fried. And since at that point they're really high protein because they're like really fat worms having just eaten a lot of poop, they can be fed to chickens. And so that's yet another product in a circular economy. So while I don't necessarily think that circular economy models are the end all be all of climate justice, they're a really important part. Like, how do we circularize what has become linear input and output and help things to come back into a whole cycle? I think that's an open question. And I really appreciate that shit is not being left out of that to some extent in these examples, but we need a lot more research and a lot more thought about it. And that won't happen until people are comfortable talking about their poo. So let's keep on breaking the taboo. Here's a Rich Earth Institute. And then in nearby Switzerland, there is a whole like eco apartment complex that is working on, in this case, doing source separating toilets. So to separate the urine and the feces, and menstrual blood can go in with the urine. It gets pasteurized and like that. That's cool. That works there. And the poop goes into this vermiculture image that you see at the bottom, and the worms in the soil percolate it. And the urine can then be bottled and sold for agricultural purposes through the engrais pasteurization process. This is called the Bistoquette, and it is up and coming in Zurich soon. And Rich Earth Institute, this is them at the urine depot. They have a whole town that like pees in urinals and then brings it to them, and they all collect the pee, and they're the leading research institution. I tell you guys about some of these because they're a place to do internships if you're interested. Looks great on your resume. But it's not only about the material itself, it's about justice. So I made up this term, which is like a fun thing to do in your academic, make up words. I haven't translated it into German yet, but I am going to write for the German Ecumenical Review here in a few weeks. So some of the stuff will be coming out in the German language. And I only say that because I would love to be in dialogue with you all who are there, because this is, how we do this work, just by being in it together and slowly making our way. But excretory justice is like, I started with defecatory justice, which is about poop, but excretory, because there's other excretas. It's like a whole framework that operates alongside other visions of justice. So like racial justice, environmental justice, etc., in the service of collective liberation, planetary regeneration, and the adoption of pro-environmental behaviors. And as a practical concern, it seeks to ensure that what comes out of our bodies remains within the natural cycle of decomposition. Why this is important to me is because some of the justice frameworks that we have mostly deal with the more than human world. Other justice frameworks deal with the social and the human, but I want more that crossover in between and remind us constantly that we are not separate from nature, and that what happens in the larger web of life also happens to us as humans. So we're not unaffected. So excretory justice like pays attention to both the poopers and the poop. Where people are peeing and what's happening to that pee afterwards. How folks are able to feel as they menstruate and what happens to that menstrual blood, right? So yeah, that's just like still working on bringing this forward. So from that bigger kind of sphere of like literal shit and how it works together with people who are treated like shit. And as you notice, actually, the people who are working on this, say from Haiti, Kenya, other places, those are places that have been marginalized and not necessarily treated well within global spaces always, but yet they are the ones that are innovating most and quickest. And so it's important that we learn from them. Yeah. And as we learn, bringing it as we like block harm and like build those alternatives, being in alignment with our deepest selves and ways of being is important. So I want to give a shout out to Avery Kalapa, who's my yoga instructor and who is accountable to the Iyengar lineage. This is really important because yoga has been deeply taken out of context and thinned out compared to the luscious intensity that it is. So this is just one example of the ways in which to think about the processing of dealing with our own shit. Light and dark are not the only metaphors, but we're going to play with that a little bit today, and just a little bit of a reflection. Okay. So you can avert your eyes from the screen now, or it's just going to be on that incredible cosmic image. And I want to share some words from Avery, who is pictured here. A little bit about dealing with our shit metaphorically. So this week in class, inspired by Diwali, a Hindu festival of light, Avery has been exploring inner illumination. But what is it to move from dark towards light? Given that in the context of yoga, people are always already whole. The invocation in the Isha Upanishad says that there is a wholeness, even a divine wholeness, in what we are. And we're part of the infinite and the complete. Anything taken from it or anything added to it, wholeness remains. Now, why I read this paragraph is important because so many times in life we are beaten down by hearing we're not enough, we're not good enough, we're not making enough money, we're not doing the right thing. You know those messages, they're in your head, those automatic negative thoughts. That's what I'm speaking to right now. How to take an orientation where you block the harm that they are and you shift your consciousness towards a sense that you are perfect, whole, and complete just as you are right now. This is the work, like we're literally making shit here. We're digesting thoughts, bringing a different energy to them and seeing what happens, right? So anything taken, anything added, wholeness remains. Like that's the basis. Not that we're deficient. Dispelling scarcity, dispelling separateness, dispelling powerlessness. Because the invitation, Avery says, if we're want to embrace all of our parts, including our butthole, well, I added that part, but if we wanting to embrace all of our parts, is it even helpful then to label some things as darkness and some as light? In a workshop that Avery was taking, a Iyengar teacher said, people think yoga is about love and light, but it's actually about darkness and fear. It's about bringing the light of our awareness into what is in the dark. So what we might consider darkness, one could also see as ignorance, egoic, ego-based definitions of self, attached to illusion, craving, aversion, or fear. Maybe also shame or unworthiness. Whatever it is that makes you feel stuck, isolated, or alone, the invitation that Avery is offering is to think of these things also as light, but as parts of ourselves, parts of our spark that have been exiled, removed, fractured, or covered in a cloak of shadows, so that we don't recognize these tender aspects as parts of our wholeness, parts of what makes us shine. So what are the things inside you that you tend to hide or blame or wish would go away? Dealing with our shit, metaphorically, is leaning into these tender complexities, perhaps to be the source, not of your suffering, but by pushing them away, will contribute to your suffering. So as you get in touch with your shadow, right, with your shadow materials, you can discover that these are actually powerful parts of our brilliance, your gifts, how you shine. And BKAS Iyengar, the initiator of the Iyengar lineage, described the integration of the light and the dark, of the shadow and the bright, as the process of returning the fragmented parts to the whole. And that's a lot of what happens during a yogic practice, is the integration of fragmented parts into the whole, bringing attention to what was subconsciously stuck, unresolved, or loose, right? So that's a yogic practice, but whatever practice you might be doing or thinking about doing, the practices and rituals in your life, you do them, but which ones have intention and which ones don't, right? This is kind of what I'm trying to say about shit. It's like, it's not a bad thing. It's not shadow. It's not gross. Like, you're not a bad person if people can hear you like plop out a turd right next to them in the public bathroom. Like, like poop with pride, right? Because it tells us, in addition to telling us a lot about our body, our stress, our mental health, like it's a moment, like excreting can be this moment of release, a moment in which you are kind to yourself and are intentional. It's not just a habit or chore, but like practices like yoga or practices like pooping, right? You can make it a practice. You're going to do it anyway. So might as well make it awesome, right? But it's like an opportunity to intimately excavate the deeper layers of who you are and what gives your life meaning, right? How might a change of orientation towards your practice of excreting and bringing intention and attention to that time, how might that reorient other parts of your life, right? Like, what is poop, right? It's a lot of water, it's some leftover cells, it's like bacteria that just used you to continue on its life and is like now excited to keep going. It's the remnants of our nervous system and mind and guts, right? And rather than that bothering us, it can become a doorway to loving and knowing ourselves and to our tender, honest humanity. And it can be a gift to the soil if we collectively figure out how to manage it and put time and attention into different ways of collecting and processing and reintegrating. I mean, don't get me wrong, the freshwater flush toilet was a brilliant invention because the water seal really separates poopers and their pathogens. However, we're at a point in which it separates us so much that we've lost the ability to know how to do safe reintegration. And it reinforces a separate individual mindset. So, taking the moment with yourself when you're excreting, and this may mean putting down your phone instead of like trying to dissociate from the experience by just being on the phone. Also, there's a lot of bacteria around, so it's also a questionable practice to use your phone while on the toilet, but you do you. I'm not here to judge. I'm just inviting a moment of intention of like when you're shitting literally to also like contemplate that metaphorical shit and to think about into why is this integration important? I'm not just here just for like your individual being a better actor in the world so you can work hard and make more money. No. I want you to have sufficient of what you need, but because I want this offering I'm making today to you to help prepare us for this really significant, intense moment that we're in. When I was in Germany, people were talking about the elections of 1933 and that it will likely be an election year in 2033. And that what has happened over the arc of the last 100 years is like not as different as we would want maybe those years to be, like around our collective learning with regards to authoritarianism, fascism, group and collective mindset, etc. Right? Y'all aren't alone in looking at these times, and it's really meaningful to be in Germany because I also felt like we in the so-called US we're not alone. We need to be prepared for what these times are calling us to do. And I mean, we need to be prepared, but it's like not really fair because our one organism shouldn't have to deal with like multi-system collapse. Like that's not right. It's like so in one way it's like impossible to be prepared. But in another way, collectively, we can metabolize what's happening. Yeah. And so even though like the most preppiest, most prepared prepper is not prepared for this moment, we do have the preparation of all those who came before us. So the interactive exercise we're going to do now, I invite you to pull out something to write with if you'd like. You'll have 2 minutes just to do some free writing. You won't necessarily have to share it with anyone while we're during this time, but I invite you to think about sharing it afterwards. Because you, yes, you, and especially you, are your ancestors' gift to this moment. We carry their gifts with us, right? We have deep evolutionary gifts from our ancestors. All of our ancestors, right? The things that happened to them, the good, the difficult, the chance, the structural, the horrific, the humorous, what they had to do to survive. All of these things allow us for some type of preparation. And this is different than saying that like everything that happened to your ancestors happened for a reason. What I'm saying is that it all provided a preparation where you can notice and experience the world around you, a preparation to share and shift perspectives, have your perspective shifted and shift others, right? So even if you don't feel personally prepared today for all that is coming at you at this moment, I invite you to get underneath that and just like really just be in this cultivation of the like deep time gifts that will arise. So we'll just go question by question, and you can write the questions down. I'm going to say each of them once, and then you'll also see it on the screen. So the first question, like you might not feel gifted, you might not even be happy today, but I want you to write down, what are the gifts from your traditions, your lineage, your teachers, and your family that have prepared you for this time? Go ahead and write. And if you're not someone who writes, just like think about it, but don't talk amongst yourselves yet. All right, just go ahead. I'll just give you a minute or so. What are the gifts from your tradition, lineage, teachers, and family that have prepared you for this time? Gifts from the earth that have prepared you for this time. You know, it's important to name them, even if you're feeling shy, right? Like, lean in. You are your ancestors' gift to this moment. What are the gifts from the earth that have prepared you for this time? What are the gifts from your visions, your dreams, your calling, and your intuition that have prepared you for this time? What are the gifts from the work, leadership experiences that you've had have prepared you for this time? And if you're still going on one of the other questions, that's fine too, but we'll just give a little bit of time for this last question. For taking that exercise and for listening. This is an activity also that you can do as a group. It comes from Joanna Macy's The Work That Reconnects, and that is a process environmental grief and empowerment work. And this was created together with a group of facilitators in that work. And often it can be, these questions can come and sit people in groups of 3 or 4, and then each person answers them while the other 3 observe, and then you go around, the next person answers them. And it's a way to be observed and seen in this life and work. So that is also a resource for you all. I see some questions in the Q&A, both on Zoom, and surely there are a few questions out there.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you in the room hear me? It's a bit silent. Okay. I will read you the questions coming in from Zoom, and then we have another mic in the room for you to head around for the questions and the people in the room.
Sounds great.
Okay.
Okay, so if any of you has any questions, I can come to you. I can also help you with translation if you're not so sure about your English. Ja, also falls ihr Hilfe braucht, falls ihr eine Frage stellen wollt, kann ich euch bei Übersetzung gerne helfen. Genau, ich kann nicht versprechen, dass es gut wird, aber wir können es zusammen versuchen. Genau. Any questions in the room?
And folks can also ask it in German and we'll get it translated, whatever works for you.
There's one question here.
Hi, thanks for your presentation, first of all. But I couldn't really see which environmental problem you're trying to solve with the composting toilets, because I don't think they are very scalable. And with the current trend of urbanization, I think we could just invest in more powerful sewage plants. And I also think sewage plants do the job of recycling, basically, and putting our poop into the whole loop, so to say, just in another way. We are not composting it, but it's still like yeah, it's still getting processed in some kind of way.
Well, thank you for asking about that dynamic. Um, I'm glad that in your area of the world you are seeing effective sewage plants and that you're seeing reintegration. Most like there's a huge issue, not only in the US, but in many, many places called combined sewer overflow, in which during a heavy rain event, of which there are more with climate change, since hotter air holds more water, in which most of our municipal sewage plants are overwhelmed. There is not, there's neither the political will nor practical capacity to expand or invest in those plants, mostly that we've seen. And so it's becoming an urgent issue. So the sanitation crisis is dual. It's not only like here where like in places where there are water toilets and sewage treatment plants that are not necessarily functioning well, and then outside of cities there's a lot of septic tanks which have a lot of seepage and tend to fail much more often than documented. But also there's many, many places around the world where fresh water is scarce, and so therefore it is not possible nor practical. And a place like Kenya, for example, has invited entrepreneurs to work on these questions because they are looking at the numbers and there's not a possible way that can generate revenue or be supported municipally where sewage plants can do this work. So it's like and and Kenya has some robust infrastructure. So in a lot of places around the world, there's not robust infrastructure. It's going to be really important to get the types of toilets that don't feel secondhand or just pit latrines or like not as good, but what is the state of the art type way that people can have dignified sanitation. So at the Bistotech and other places, I think they're proving that this is quite scalable, but it matters if people are willing to talk about poop and pee and be like, this shit makes sense. We should do it. So scalability has been proven in various places, but it's the worldview, the values, the resistance to wanting to like lean in that is actually blocking some of the innovation in which you'd see additional scalability. Often at wastewater treatment plants, the sludge that comes out of there in the US is often burned, releasing a lot of carbon into the air, as well as not returning those nutrients. Furthermore, in combined sewer overflow, it also means that it's not just excreta and household sewerage, like from showers and other things, that's going into at least our plants. It's also industrial wastewater and field runoff. And so this is a high chemical load of PFAS and other forever chemicals that are combining with excreta, as well as huge amounts of cow manure, particularly that is over applied on fields. And so we have huge nutrient loads that are going into waterways or being burned or being buried. So by removing the human excreta load, that's something that we can do and would really take the pressure off existing wastewater treatment plants in place. And in most of the world where things are unable to have the fresh water in order to create those plants, the intervention that nutrient cycling offers is a way that they can leapfrog into a future, because I actually don't think there's a future in which we will continue to poop and pee in fresh water for the most part. It often shifts during time of a panic when there are not, then that infrastructure suddenly becomes unavailable and people have to figure out a different way to excrete safely. And I'm interested in people who are leaning into it to see how we can shift before there is a panic. But thank you for that question. Yeah.
Thank you for your answer. Are there any more questions in the room? I
I
can't
have,
see any right now. Danny, do you want to continue with like our online questions?
yes, we have received a few questions online. One is, I read it to you. I believe human waste is often not used due to the biological hazard of human diseases being kept in a loop. Can you address this problem?
All right, can you say that one more time? Because I actually can't see that question, but I would love to. Go ahead. Say it again.
We've received that question. I believe human waste is often not used due to the biological hazard of human diseases being kept in a loop. Can you address this problem?
Yeah, that is so important to ask about, right? So this is where the it's super important to process poop well, specifically. Urine is mostly sterile, and even the pharmaceuticals, which pass through people's bodies, that mostly shows up in urine and not in poop. But the pharmaceutical question is really important, right? Like if we're fertilizing with stuff that has pharmaceutical residuals. These tests are currently being done right now by Rich Earth Institute and EOVAG in Zurich and like many other places. And it is really incredible how much the earth is able to break down the impact of the pharmaceuticals and the pasteurization process therein. As it relates to poop, it's super important to figure out ways of processing, but heat and time both can do it. Ideally, both heat and time together. That is the best solution. And it's well documented that excreta itself, again, not combined with cow manure, not combined with industrial runoff or other chemicals, those pathogens are broken down at 140 to 150 degrees for over 7 days at that consistent heat. Pathogens are not able to survive. And that's really important. And you don't want it to go over 180 degrees. Again, I'm sorry, I'm using Fahrenheit here. Because that will actually degrade the soil quality. It's just too hot. So this is what I know from the research that I've seen. We need so much more research on this to like continue to refine and document and figure out just how we can do this well, because we don't want anyone getting sick. So the first part is containment. That's always important. The second is treatment. And the treatment currently in most wastewater treatment plants is highly chemical. But we have the resources of the sun and the condensing it to make it possible to do it in other ways. But I just invite more research on that front so that we can make sure that everyone feels really confident, because it's crucially important that there's no pathogenic load, and it is possible.
Thank you for the answer. Any more questions in the room? Okay, then we of our team, we have thought of a rather important question, I believe, ourselves. What are your thoughts on menstrual hygiene regarding climate justice?
Yeah, this is really key and an important type of excreta. I did see one of the Q&A also was asking about religion and the rapture and people wanting to like go away from earth. And the invitation is to recognize that there is no away, like everything stays here. So in terms of menstruation, why that is really important to continue to talk about is because it addresses patriarchy and the like very historic and documented fear of menstruators' blood. There's also a lot of research done on the nutrient-rich blood that it is. And the first thing to do, it's really important, is to recognize that the impact of using bleached cotton materials that are bleached white is not great for proximity to the menstruating genitalia, right? So that's number one. And why that's important issue is because there are a lot of ways around the world that people have found to bleed in ways that are healthy for the body, that challenge the rhythms of like the plug up and shut up of capitalism and things of that nature. But there is now a desire, especially because of the colonial era, to have like bleached white tampons or bleached white pads, because white means clean and white means civilized. And so there's some worldview stuff to pick apart there, because a banana fiber pad or like a reusable pad, all of those are all possible and hygienic ways to go. But people have to get over the like white is clean and better type thing. And also, there's just it's like such an important question as a part of broader reproductive justice, and making sure that people have a sense of their bodily autonomy and care in connection with the whole. So I'm going to answer it from some of those worldview pieces, because that's like where my main expertise is. But there are people who write on menstrual justice and the importance of making sure that it's possible that people have the materials that they need and the time that they need, because it is a huge issue in which if people don't feel comfortable menstruating in schools, that those menstruators, and they're often girls, will not come to school. But part of what they don't feel comfortable about is that the bathroom is not necessarily just their blood, but that the bathroom at the school is dirty, gross, and is not private, doesn't give them dignity. And so I think by working back with figuring out how to make awesome bathrooms, toilets, excreta infrastructure systems, right, that will improve everybody's experience, no matter what is coming out.
Thank you. Again, more questions in the room. If you have any questions on Zoom, you can just write them into the Q&A section. And Sarah Nahar will be able to see them.
People seem to be a bit shy. It's usually like that with English language lectures.
No problem. I'm happy to share a couple more examples if that would be helpful, if we still have time. Yeah? All right, let's do it. Here we go. I just appreciate everyone coming and thinking together about it. Super. All right. Here we go. So what some of the theory that undergrounds part of what I'm doing is called critical environmental justice. Please let me know, Danny, if you're not seeing the screen. You see the screen with like a Venn diagram between religion and environment? Super. Okay, great. So we've had to mature our sense of environmental justice. It used to be more state-centered, and now we're coming into an analysis that's not only challenges states, but also corporations and also individual billionaires and things of that nature. So we've had to like change tactics quite a lot. Critical environmental justice also is conceptualized by David Naguib-Pello, and I have a picture of him with my fam on the next page, but want to recognize specifically his work. And then also our environmental justice work used to constantly just like go work on a national level. And now we're recognizing that the international and the local and the watershed and the regional, that all of those scales, including the scales of oneself, make a difference in our struggle. And so this has to do with the movement ecosystem that I'm talking about, right? So critical environmental justice is a both theory and a practice that we're trying to mature for the climate justice movement. And sometimes, this is point 3 here, it was like maybe more narrowly focused on race and sometimes gender. And now we understand that both race and gender and class and nation and status and everything like that is all intersecting and all really important when we think about how people are being impacted by the siting of hazardous materials and plants, by the government policies related to them, or corporate actions, right? So it's intersectional. And then most importantly, Critical environmental justice challenges expendability. We used to think that if we just told people about what we were going through as marginalized and impacted communities, that they would understand and change their mind. However, we realized that that, unfortunately, isn't the case, and people do know and sometimes still don't care. So within our movements, it's super important to have a politics of indispensability where no one can be flushed and forgotten. So in moving towards a politics of indispensability, which contests the politics of expendability, and expendability is like how we treat shit. Like it can just go and get treated by someone else. It's not our problem anymore. That's also how populations have been treated, especially in the case of like Marcellus Khalifa Williams, who here is representing people who have been incarcerated, right? He was sentenced to death on a crime that he says he did not commit. Death row is a horrendous experience in the US. By the time he was sentenced to death and the time he was assigned to be executed, it was revealed to the prosecutor and to the judge and to others who were on that case that he was indeed innocent. However, the mechanisms of the system in Missouri of the US and in US higher courts didn't reconsider that evidence. And so just last September, he was executed. This is the politics of expendability, of saying it's too much work to have to rethink our systems and things are working well enough. Okay, maybe we can make our systems a little better, rather than saying, actually, the logic of the system itself is a logic of separation and is a logic of violence. And so the invitation of politics of indispensability is from separation to connection, violence to belonging. Yeah. And so here's a picture of Marcellus Khalifa Williams and also our fam. Married to a Palestinian person who works a lot on challenging Christian Zionism and challenging the expendability of the Palestinian people in the global system. Right. So these politics of expendability don't have to have the last word, but to move towards a politics of indispensability means we have to deal with our shit literally and metaphorically. One way I did that in one of my dissertations, because I ended up writing one for religion and one for environmental studies. So I think in German, that's your like dissertation or Habilitatio. But in US, we usually write one only. So it was a lot of work, but it was worth it. And I got to partner with Salt City Harvest Farm, which works on growing food, culture, and community. And what I asked, and they are ready to put a toilet at their community farm site. So instead of just assuming that they wanted a freshwater flush toilet, I did surveys and interviews to see what kind they wanted. This is important because this is a group of people who are refugees, and many of them grew up with very different toilet systems than the ones in the US. Most people would assume that the US toilets are superior and that refugees ought to just assimilate to our type of dominant toilet. However, because our toilets are part of the politics of expendability, I was working with a politic of indispensability, which does not necessarily mean that we'll end up with a different toilet, but it means that we ask the question. And it means that we pay attention to those who are most marginalized. And refugees in the United States right now are incredibly targeted and marginalized. And so since this farm is dedicated to solidarity, I wanted to ask that. So here's just the quick results distillation. And the chart over here on the right doesn't matter too much. Like I know you can't see it, but it's just me showing how I coded the different interviews and what they meant and who was willing to do what labor. But 2 people wanted a squatting toilet that flushed some water. 6 people wanted a sitting flush toilet. 4 wanted a squatting composting toilet, and 4 wanted a sitting composting toilet. So overall, it was like tied 8-8 on flush versus composting. And there was an overall higher preference for sitting versus squatting, which was really interesting because a lot of people said they grew up squatting, but now having been in the US for a while, they lost the muscles it takes to squat. And our conversation centered more on accessibility and acceptability because refugees did not want to be perceived as being backwards. And what that meant to them is because, I mean, there's a toilet company in the US for a long time that was called American Standard Toilet, right? And so if you would reject an American standard, then they were nervous that the folks in the US would see them as not as human, as discardable, as not as good as white US Americans. And they aspired to be included and to feel belonging. And so they worried if they set up a toilet system that allowed them to poop in peace, it would result in some stereotypes against them. Or as they're farmers and understood nutrient cycling and its safety and everything, and human manure and manures, they were nervous that there would be backlash. So it was a very sensitive topic and subject, but really meaningful. And in the end, what will probably happen at this farm site is that there won't just be one toilet interface, but there'll be two. And there'll be two different types of interface, one squatting, one sitting. And we have yet to see how the processing will happen, whether it'll be water flush, but into a composting system, or connected to water overall. So this is just an example of how, as an academic and scholar activist, I can participate with communities in figuring some of that out. Just got to ask the questions and move at the speed of trust. So I'll just add some practical applications of what I've shared here today. So I just invite you, this is especially for when you're speaking English, to call excreta as specifically as possible, avoiding the word waste. And in that time of intentionality that I invited you to come into, because I do think our separation mentality is the biggest environmental challenge that we have. So when you're like paying attention when you're pooping, I might just say thank you each time you flush the toilet, transforming a habitual moment into an intentional one. Say thank you to your body for excreting well. Say thank you to whoever the humans and more than humans are down the tube who will take care of your shit and your pee and your blood, your semen, whatever it is, just say thank you to them. And I invite you to add this question of excretory justice to the list of issues that you name when you're talking about climate justice. If people are focused on having to find a spot to release in peace each day, it's going to be difficult for them to join the movement. So I just call this work the back end of food justice. Food justice is super important, but food justice doesn't end when it gets to the mouth of the people and their stomach. It goes through the guts, and it's what happens afterwards too. So when you talk about food justice, please include excretory justice. And please continue to commit to doing your own internal work consistently, whatever that looks like. We all have our shit to deal with. It's not a shame. It's only a shame if we don't deal with it and find ways that we can be good to ourselves and one another so we can be a healthy part of this climate justice ecosystem. And with that, I'll give the last word to Sean Schaffner, who's the Puru. He works with the Poop Project, and he says that poop is actually an acronym in English. It's the people's own organic power. So, as I mentioned, poop can be a source of energy, right? It can be converted to power things, and not only that, but it's like our gift to the earth if we can get our systems to be in alignment. And if you want to know more about what I'm up to, you're welcome to join the Poop Troop there with the QR code. So I'll pause there as we're at our time. And I thank you for your attention and your participation.
Yes, thank you for your lecture. It was very, in the original sense, wholesome. and your passion, which won't confuse your screen. We do have one last question from the team, which we like to ask our lecturers at the end of the lecture. What still gives you hope in the view of the climate crisis?
Yeah. Yeah. Part of what gives me hope is life itself and the fact that we both are fed by life, and we then give ourselves to feed each other and to feed life itself. Like the cycle itself gives me hope because we're all connected in this cycle. And in many northern hemisphere traditions right now, we're at a time in which they call Samhain or Halloween, or like the veil is thin during these changing moments. And it's a time where we honor like death and decay and going underground and the underworld, and recognizing that that's part of life too. And so this kind of collective turning to that recognition, even though it gets really commercialized, is super important and gives the mushrooms and the fungi a lot of food to do this work that we know and trust will rest. And come springtime, we will see the power of regeneration.
Thank you. And then that's it for our lecture today. Thank you, Dr. Sarah Nahar, for the work that you do for dealing with people's shit. And I will see all of you in the room and online next week. Thank you and good night.